host of initiatives that are underway to make rail even safer going forward. And just kind of a capsulized version here, has served as Secretary Commissioner of the Delaware and New Jersey Transportation Departments, Treasurer of the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, and served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation. I want you to welcome Ann Camby. And they didn't give us a step to come up here, did they?
I can still handle it.
Okay.
I can still handle it. Let's see.
Oh, and you should have the remote here. Did you get that?
Oh, no.
Let me get it for you.
Coming. We're coming. Well, good evening, everybody. Great to be here with you all. And Peter, thank you and Texas Rail Advocates for inviting me to speak about safety. I said to one of my dinner partners, safety is sort of a serious subject for an after-dinner speech, but let's see how we make out. I suspect that just about everybody in this room has had something to do with something I'm going to talk about. And hopefully the report will give you more reasons to advance the whole idea of more rail, passenger and freight. Let's see if I point this in the right place to change. What do I aim this at? There we go, okay. Anyway, before I talk about rail safety, in case you don't know about One Rail, we are a very broad coalition that includes rail owners, operators, suppliers, employees, advocates, who've come together over the last 8 or so years to really advance the cause of rail, passenger and freight, and help more people understand that it's actually part of the transportation system of the United States. In my various experiences, not everybody always realizes that. So we want to make sure that they do, and to help them understand the critical role that rail plays. And so that's what One Rail has been doing, mostly focused in Washington, but I'm thinking now it's really important for us to get outside of that bubble and talk more to people in what I like to call the real world about rail and its value as we try and generate more support for it. But the good news is that there's a lot of conversation and focus about safety in this whole transportation space for all the modes, as we all know. Every form is monitored by industry as well as numerous governments. So safety is a pretty hot topic in transportation. So we thought at One Rail that it would be a good idea if we took a look across modes to see just what that looks like, and it's actually a pretty good story. And we say in this report that rail is safer than its main competition, and we say that's really the highway mode, and it's safer than it's ever been, which is something I think most of you are already pretty aware of. Now, the chart you're seeing on the left-hand side, and all those gray bars, shows fatalities by mode, and the gray represents highway fatalities. You can see barely at the top a little bit of green. That's everybody else. So obviously, because everybody's driving a whole lot more, there are a lot more fatalities. But the interesting thing I think that's worth noting about that is that it's not so much the numbers, which are horrendous, but the fact that the rates, both for accidents and for fatalities, are much higher on the highway side when you take it on a passenger or freight ton-mile basis. And to give you an example, intercity passenger rail and commuter rail is about 10 times safer than driving in your car. On the freight side, on a 10 billion per ton rate, it's about a third, rail is about a third of the truck fatalities. So the message, I think, is that if we got more people and more goods out of cars and trucks, we would save a lot of lives. That is a writ large safety message that I think it's really worth delivering. On the other, go back one for a second. You can see on the right-hand side, the tall bar there is motorcycles. People say that and say, whoa. And rail is the darker one right in the middle between the two greens. So we are, again, much safer, and we have a similar chart in the report for freight as well. Okay, now let's advance. The trend over the last 10 years or so, as we've said, has been very positive, even as, and you see this on the chart on the left, passenger rail traffic has grown about 23%, and freight rail about 5%. Obviously, that accounts for the dip back in 2008 and 9. But we've had more of all of this, and even with that, the trends have improved. The overall decline is about 31% in train accident rates, and I'll talk more in a moment about derailment and grade crossing. 72% decline in hazardous materials, and 17 for employee casualty rates. Now we asked why. What has helped produce these great trends? Part of it, we think, is investment. And as all of you know, and maybe some have participated in helping make this happen, the railroads, the Class I railroads, have invested over $200 billion in the last 10 years or so to improve their networks, private capital going into their networks. And even on the passenger side, which we all know is totally starved for capital, on the passenger side, Amtrak and the commuter railroads in 2014 invested about $4 billion. So there is a fair amount of money going in. It's not anywhere near what it should be. And that you see on the right-hand top chart, the bottom is the decline in the accident rates overall. So moving on, we further asked what else has contributed to it. And we look at, in this case, next slide, please. Thank you. The grade crossing issue, 27% decline in the last 10 years. And this is an example of North Carolina doing a grade separation. You can see the chart on the bottom, on the left, showing the decline. But in addition to that, there is the dedicated rail highway crossing funding that the states get, Section 130, we all know it. Operation Lifesaver and its public service announcements and its social media initiatives. Amtrak is doing an interesting thing on driver's education, trying to get more information in driver ed manuals so people are aware of crossings. BNSF, officers on the train program that they're doing, where an officer is actually in the locomotive, and if they see somebody trespassing, they can actually wire ahead and have someone come and try and apprehend the person. But they also get a sense of what's going on out there. It blows my mind to see pictures of young people, mostly young people, I guess, with their selfies, taking pictures on the railroad. I mean, this is crazy. So helping to get more understanding that this is not someplace where you ought to be taking pictures. In North Carolina, the results are pretty amazing, what they have accomplished. Over the last 20 years or so, half of their crossings that were unprotected, they have improved it by about 50%. And there's about a 2/3 to almost 100% reduction in the rate of violations. It varies, obviously, depending on the type of improvement that was put in place. Now here in Texas, there are about 9,100 crossings, 181 crashes in 2014, 29 fatalities, and 103 injuries. There's an area where you all could work and really try and drive those numbers down. So that's an opportunity for you right here. In terms of derailments, we'll move to the next one. Again, a significant decline, about 33% overall. We split out the passenger and the freight because the numbers are so different. But there are a whole number of reasons, and I'm sure a bunch of you have worked on a whole range of them, from the track geometry cars getting more use and improved, much more welded rail. Almost 100% of Amtrak's owned system is welded rail, and about a little over 100,000 miles on the Class 1s are welded rail. Ultrasonic testing, improved ties, and equipment monitoring are some of the examples that we bring out in the report to help illustrate and show why that's happened. And we tried to use some technology. I said to the folks that I worked with on this report, let's get some things in there that will appeal to people who are half my age. And they're much younger folks that we want to try and make sure they understand this is not just our grandfather's railroads. Moving on, employee safety. Again, a 17% decline over this 10-year period, with a number of things being done. Safety analysis process, I think UP and BMW are working on that process. A system safety program that FRA instituted through rulemaking in July for passenger rail operators. Short Lane Safety Institute getting off the ground. Positive train control, need I say anything more about that? Hopefully it will come along. And drones, as Peter mentioned, as we're going to hear tomorrow from BNSF about that. So some ways to try and introduce some new thoughts, new technologies into the process for folks to understand. We work with a lot of staff people on Capitol Hill, and they are much younger than I am, and we want them to understand that this is really not just an old mode of transportation, but also a very modern one as well. So moving on, the next trend is, so where are we today, and what do we do about it? Where are the problems? When you look at it, the two charts here show on the left that about 92% of the fatalities on rail are either trespassing or at grade crossing. And clearly easier probably to deal with the grade crossing than trespassing, but once we begin to focus on it, then it's easier to figure out what we do about it. I was just in the observation car at Amtrak on the Northeast Corridor, and they're putting fencing in limited areas where they notice a lot of crossing going on to try and stop it from happening. On the other chart here on the right is nothing that's a surprise to you either, probably 40% human factors and 27% track for train-related accidents. So those are areas that we look to see what things are coming down the pike to help keep this trend driving in the right direction. So the next slide, please. And here are some of the things. I mentioned a few of them before, but the FAST Act included highway rail grade crossing action plans that the states now need to put together. Big data is another area that is beginning to be really explored. TTCI is working with railroads to look at ways to improve maintenance of rail cars, looking at a much bigger array of data. And then phased array, going a step further than ultrasonic inspections, are some of the ideas that we put out there that are beginning to happen or get closer to being happening. Now we'll switch a little bit because the next two charts I'm going to show you are not actually in the report. But when you look at that whole record over the 10 years and see what's happened, the message that I got is that we really ought to be thinking about understanding how people actually travel. And the chart here is from a TRB report that came out, I think, about last August or so on interregional travel. And the circle part, those blue lines, those are trips by auto from 100 to 600 miles. That says to me there's an opportunity here from a safety standpoint, if for no other reason. So that's just one thing. And then I've talked to Marty Wax, who I'm sure many of you know, who's very distressed that this report hasn't gotten more attention. But interregional data, as you all know, is one of the harder things to put together because we don't think that way. And so it's much more challenging. But I think this tells a pretty important story. Now, trying to break it down by individual corridors, that gets done when you're looking at something in specific, but we don't have that kind of data, I don't think, at the national level very well. And the next chart, I'm sure all of you are familiar with as well. This is federal investment from about I forget where it starts in the far left, but it's in the early 50s maybe. The green, as you can imagine, is highway investment. The yellow is air, and blue, can you see it? That's rail. I would suggest that there is somewhat of a bias in the federal investment pattern. And Treasury just came out very recently, I think, with a report on 40 infrastructure projects of major economic significance, 10 of which are rail, and funding was cited, every single one of these, as the problem of why it's not getting done. So I think there is a message we can deliver that if you're serious about safety, then we ought to look at how we're investing our money and understanding better how we travel. Because if we increase market share, if it was an explicit policy to do that, we would in fact save a lot of lives. And we say safety is number one, but I'll really believe it when we start doing things like this, which is huge mountain to climb. I understand. I've been in 2 state DOTs. I understand the silo lock that we seem to live in. But if we don't start breaking down those barriers and thinking across modal lines and figuring out what the smartest way to invest is, we're never going to achieve the goals we say we wish to do. So I encourage and actually implore all of you to carry this message of rail safety to every audience you can think of so that we have more people understanding this aspect of the many benefits of rail. And let's go forward and make this message heard everywhere. And you have a great chance for Railroad Day on the Hill and at any other gatherings like that that you happen to attend. Just this ought to be one of the tools in the toolkit, safety. And with that, I really appreciate your listening, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions. If not now, then tomorrow I'll be around for a little while as well. Thank you very, very much.